Welcome to the second workshop for the SWA. This one is Free the People, Free the Land, about Indigenous land reclamation struggles in so-called Canada and around the world. And before we start, these are things that you should donate to. Like First Nations who are currently struggling against the Canadian state and corporations and shit like that. The first one is the van that just got torched last night in Nova Scotia by those settler fishermen. I think that goes directly to the person whose van that was. And the second one's the land back donations and tiny house warriors, and then the Wet'suwet'en legal fund. Oh, and 52 people have been arrested so far for Six Nations, so that's pretty bad. You guys should donate. So thought I'd start with what is Canada, to put into context all these land back struggles that are happening, and why the Canadian government is always at war with Indigenous people who are literally just defending their land and their rights. Okay, so first of all, Canada is capitalist. It's built and operates on a system of the exploitation of one class, which is the proletariat or the working class, by the ruling class or the bourgeoisie. And this is the principal contradiction in Canada and everywhere, which means that the quest for profit by corporations and that's aided by the state is always put above like things like the environment and people's health and the well-being of land, and also the global climate, which also explains why countries like Canada always sign these agreements, like the Paris Accord and all those biodiversity preservation agreements, but then they buy pipelines that go through and poison Indigenous land and water. And Canada is also settler colonial, which means that all of what is now called Canada and the US is land that belonged to thousands of Indigenous nations that existed for centuries before European colonialism came here, and they brought their violence and their diseases and their exploitation. And since they're the original eradication of the original inhabitants of this land and the caretakers of land to make way for European capitalism, Canada has maintained its settler colonial relationship with all the First Nations. They had the Indian Act, still have the Indian Act, and the reserve system, and of course the court-ordered land theft, which we see everywhere from coast to coast right now. And lastly, Canada is imperialist. It's one of the most powerful capitalist states, which means it maintains its super profits and its flow of luxuries to the ruling class here by exploiting working people in the peripheral countries that it treats like colonies for resources and surplus value. So outside of its made-up borders, it brings war, famine, exploitation, land destruction, and all kinds of horrible, miserable shit to the working and oppressed people of the world. Oh, and here's a fun little fact. By 2014, the richest 86 individuals in Canada controlled more wealth than the poorest 11.4 million. It's a lot of zeros after the 11.4. That brings us to self-determination. So the colonized people of everywhere, of Canada and globally, they obviously all have the right to national liberation by any means necessary. And the struggles of colonized people here, for example, and colonized people in the Philippines and Palestine are all interconnected in their fight against world imperialism. And they're united in their armed struggle for self-determination against the death grip that white supremacy and capitalism have on life, land, and resources. The past and current land reclamation struggles, like so-called Oka crisis, the Intifada, the land back lane struggle, they've all been a part of the fight against capitalist resource exploitation and also land exploitation, and direct actions and blockades against them, like what we're seeing now with land back lane. They reveal the basis of this colonialism, which has always been the pursuit of profit. And wherever Indigenous people resist this trail of like economic and social misery, they are called terrorists by the state and by the corporations, like the Haldimand Police County that called Skylar Williams and all the other Six Nations land defenders terrorists just because they're like just standing on their own land. Oh, and this poster is from the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Here is a quote from the Red Nation. It says, "We will build a new world from the ashes of empire, a world where many worlds fit." And this is not a quote from the Red Nation. This is from a strategy, the Strategy for Liberation of Palestine by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. I thought it's a good quote because it kind of, I'll just read it. It's a good quote. So the struggle for Palestine will, as regards to the Palestinian and Arab masses, be a gateway towards the culture of the age and a transition from a state of underdevelopment to the requirements of modern life. Through the struggle, we shall acquire political awareness of the facts of the age, throw away illusions, and learn the value of facts. The habits of underdevelopment, represented by submission, dependence, individualism, tribalism, laziness, anarchy, and impulsiveness, will change through the struggle into recognition of the value of time, order, accuracy, objective thought, collective action, planning, comprehensive mobilization, the pursuit of learning, and the acquisition of all of its weapons. The value of man, the emancipation of women, which constitute half of our society, from the servitude of outworn customs and traditions, and the fundamental importance of the national bond in facing danger, and the supremacy of this bond over clan, tribal, and regional bonds. The struggle against the enemies of Indigenous self-determination, so the capitalists and the imperialist countries of the world. It's also the struggle of the world's proletariat class against the misery of the old world, which is a world of class divide and systems of oppression like patriarchy and devastating wars that are waged as a solution to the crisis of profitability. So the settler working class and Indigenous struggles, the relations between settlers of Canada and the US and Indigenous people, according to Jay Sakai and a lot of people who agree with him, is that white settlers of Turtle Island represent the labor aristocracy, and only the original inhabitants of these lands are the real proletariat and the revolutionary base of the entire continent, which includes Indigenous people and also Black people who would make up their own nation within the United States, for example, and immigrants. So he correctly argues that the life and luxuries afforded to the white settler class of the US, and by extension, Canada, so all of Turtle Island, only exist because of the genocide and continued oppression of colonized people here and outside these borders, which means that settler society is fundamentally parasitic, which makes settlers support genocide, racism, and imperialism because of their attachment to settler privileges. His conclusion is that the central division or contradiction in these societies is between oppressed nations and the white oppressor nation, which also means, according to him, that unions and all efforts to unite workers can't really bridge the gap between oppressed nations and the oppressor nation. And that things like the IWW and all of their efforts to like be anti-racist and all that are just efforts to control the oppressed nations within the country. I just thought it might be important to include like this book and this line on settler society, even though I don't agree with the conclusion. It's obviously flawed in a lot of ways, but it raises the important question of who really is the revolutionary base in settler society and colonies like Turtle Island, and how can self-determination for Indigenous nations be achieved against the powerful forces of capitalism and imperialism? Now, he doesn't really answer this question in the book. He kind of just like points out that the main divide is this like settlers versus oppressed nations. So there's not much to go on from there. But we do know that stuff like this happens. So for example, workers in Italy refused to load cargo onto Saudi Arabian ships that were headed to Yemen, presumably ships that would be carrying weapons to kill Yemeni children. So this was a pretty cool protest, and it happened more than once, where dock workers would just refuse to load ships that were headed to Yemen and other places where they knew that would make them complicit in pretty much war crimes and horrible things that imperialist countries were engaging in. And as we know, the power of the ruling class and the systems of colonialism and imperialism that they keep in place are based primarily on the exploitation of the working class. So the profits and all of the power that they maintain is only because of the labor of the workers and the exploitation of this class globally and within their own borders. And this class knows, subconsciously at least, or most of them do, that they have a world to win and nothing to lose when they with the abolishment of capitalism. So when trains are blocked, or for this example, docks are, blocked from loading ships, or factories that are manufacturing weapons are shut down by protesters, the wars that the imperialists wage against oppressed nations are disrupted to a reasonable amount. A group called Palestine Action in the UK just shut down Elbit, I think it's pronounced Elbit, the weapons manufacturers that is the main supplier of Israel's drones that they use in Gaza. So that was pretty cool. And they actually had to stop working for about a week. And more on the settlers, J. Sakai line. So the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine has rejected more than once the claim that Palestinian liberation will be achieved only by throwing all Jewish settlers into the sea. And obviously, we've seen recently that Indigenous land reclamation struggles always call on allies to participate in direct actions against the states and the corporations that steal their land. And we know that a militant working class movement in settler society has appeared before. For example, the IWW that J. Sakai is against. And the resistance to the Vietnam War, the Winnipeg strike, things like that show that working class movements in settler society can be pretty militant and do strike fear into the hearts of capitalists and the state, which means that the contradictions of settlers versus native nations can and has to be overcome to ensure that Indigenous self-determination can occur, because striking capitalists and imperialists where it hurts, where they can't make profits anymore by disrupting the flow of capital and the flow of trains and shit like that, that's what really makes people pay attention, makes people sympathetic to movements for land reclamation. and also actually brings about change. Does anyone have questions or things they would want to discuss about all this?
So yeah, I do have a question. What would you kind of say, given like the land reclamation struggles that are happening currently in Canada, like what do you think the role of the settlers in Canada is to kind of be in solidarity with these land defenders?
Well, I can only I guess echo what the land defenders are actually calling for, which recently has been for allies to contact their MPPs, their local politicians, which even though we know that's not that usually not that effective, it is what that's being called for right now. And Mike Schreiner, the Guelph MPP, just spread a letter of support for Six Nations land defenders, so it does work sometimes, I guess. Obviously donate to all the links, which I will put in the chat right now. Going to the site is obviously the most important thing that anyone can do, but people are being arrested. 52 people until now have been arrested for just going to the site and dropping off supplies, but it's always needed. Firewood is always needed. And with winter coming up, like insulation, stuff like that. And obviously settlers are in a much more privileged position, so going to the site and risking getting arrested for a settler is not as bad as for an Indigenous person, probably. Definitely, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually, because I know Sakai kind of says that there won't be national liberation until the settler is kind of expelled. But I also see how using the kind of privilege that you have, standing in solidarity and kind of betraying the settler colonial system can also be very effective in helping these land defenders as well.
Yeah, for sure. They definitely need supplies right now. So if anyone does have a chance to go down there, bring firewood and water and stuff like that. That's using your privilege for a good thing.
Yeah, for sure.
I just posted the all the donation things. There's obviously more everywhere, but these are the main ones that I could find right now.
Can you kind of go over each donation link and kind of give a little bit of backstory to everything, just for the people here?
Yeah, let me do that. Can everyone still see my screen? Did I stop sharing?
I can, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay, the first one, this is the donation link. Oops. I think for the person, no, I'm pretty sure, for the person whose van got torched last night in Nova Scotia by the settler fishermen. They also I think poisoned a bunch of crabs, or not poisoned, yeah, poisoned and killed a bunch of crabs that they were fishing, and messed up their traps and all that, which is a big escalation in the whole situation that was going on. It was a big settler rally. A lot of violent stuff happened, and there's probably going to be way more happening in the future. So we should probably have a rally or something at some point in Guelph to collect donations. All that. Yeah, the second link, Land Back Lane. This is for the legal fund. So 52 people have been arrested so far, including Skylar Williams' wife. I think today this happened, and someone else who was literally just walking their dog in Land Back Lane. So yeah, that's super messed up. But the legal funds are increasing, so that would be good to donate. Oh, and the whole dispute is because Mackenzie, what is it? Kinsey Meadows is trying to push a housing development through Six Nations land. And obviously they do not want that, so did not give consent to the construction. And Tiny House Warriors, that donation link is for the houses that were built along the TMX pipeline route to stop the construction. Because that's also was not giving, did not get consent from First Nations along the route. So that's being blocked. And obviously they're facing, like every other situation, they're facing violence from settlers around the area. And the last one is the Wet'suwet'en Legal Fund. Well, it's the whole website, but it takes you to the legal fund donation. I think yesterday or this morning or somewhere around that time, they started drilling for the CGL pipeline. So that's messed up. People are definitely going to get arrested. So donations would be good.